Matt, why don't you tell us a bit more about, like, really why you started this? Like, why did you really start this? What was the real thing you were considering?
That's such a big question in a way, a simple one, but a big one, because I think what drew me to this, creating this podcast, was my own, for want of a better word, ambivalence about being a dad. Like most people, I don't want to say every person, but like most people, I suppose, having my son was a massive turning point in my life. I was present at his birth. I was the first to hold him. We had this extraordinary experience of birth at home, and it was a deeply powerful, moving, earth-quaking kind of event in my life. And it's one, and I know this is a cliche, but it's one I was absolutely not prepared for emotionally. I mean, I'd been to the antenatal classes, been through all the stuff with my partner Catherine, and I had a good understanding, I thought, of what was about to arrive into our lives, but actually, I didn't. And we had some unique challenges. Like every parent has different challenges, but we had a real challenge with feeding and sleep. In the first 6 months, our son had an undiagnosed tongue tie. Feeding was incredibly difficult for him, and the levels of stress and distress in our lives was very high at the time. Although I'd done a lot of personal development work, I had a lot of therapy, I'd been very successful in my professional life, this particular emotional tsunami that came into my life, I was unprepared for, and it triggered a lot of things in me, some of which I might go into in another time. I won't go into too much detail today, but it felt like a bomb had gone underneath me in some ways. And quite often when you talk to other parents or dads in the lead up to birth, there's a lot of sugarcoating. There's a lot of this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I wouldn't change it for the world. And maybe I would say some of those things too now. I had a couple of friends who painted a very different picture, and I thought it was really uncharitable and unkind of them. As we were sitting in the pub a few times, and they were telling me it was going to be a really rough ride, and it was just like, and they described all the hellish moments they'd had as parents, as both men and women involved in this conversation. I thought, oh, it's just don't burst my bubble, but actually they were real. I can really acknowledge that now. I did probably what I have done most of my adult life in the face of severe stress. I have gone and thrown myself into work massively, and I've probably eaten unhealthily. Those have been my two kind of coping mechanisms, and I think both those things came out quite strongly in that period after my son was born. I had left. I was in the process of leaving the business that I'd created 9 years before. I was on my last 3 months, and I was part-time when I came back from maternity leave. And I got involved in setting up a not-for-profit ecotherapy project in Brighton. And I got involved, I set up my own therapy practice because I decided to have a career change at that point. And I really threw myself into those. I remember having my son on my chest, sleeping like at 4 a.m, with my laptop out and starting to create the website for my new business, and then writing business plans for the other business, at odd times of the night and day. And I'm going to say one of my most embarrassing moments was that one of my avoidance strategies was Candy Crush, which I don't have on my phone, but we had a Bluetooth speaker in our house at that time, and I came back from the loo one day, and my partner said, "Have you got game? Or it's like, have you got Candy Crush on your phone or something?" I went, "No, no." And she said, "Well, it's just been broadcasting on our Bluetooth speaker for the last 20 minutes." And sometimes, I'd go to the loo, even though I definitely did not need the loo, just so I could get away and from the overwhelm, really, and play Candy Crush. So there was quite a lot of avoidance, I think. And and amazing moments, of course, there were. I think there was those moments like of blissed outness you get when you connect with your child and see this new life developing, and the awe as you see them take their steps developmentally, sitting up, rolling over, crawling, smiling, articulating their first words. All that was truly amazing. But I also felt like I was in this parallel universe for a long time of not really seeing anybody, just struggling on. As a couple, my kind of social life fell away. So it was really work and baby. That was all I knew at that time. And I felt very guilty about that and quite ashamed about it. I felt like, particularly as I was trained as a therapist, I should be on top of life better than that. I shouldn't be the person who's acting out with Candy Crush or with sugary food or reverting to workaholic tendencies to avoid what is painful and difficult. But I was doing that. And at some point it occurred to me that I probably wasn't the only dad who was having that kind of experience. He wasn't feeling like he was fucking up in some way or other. I felt that probably others had that experience, but it's really hard to talk about. It's really hard to go out there and say, this is a struggle for me. There are times when I feel really bored. There are times when I feel really distant from my partner, where I feel like I'm a spare part in all this. There are times where my identity, as I knew it, has been completely compromised and remolded in a way that I hadn't expected. Or, obviously, I was a willing partner in the creation of my child. That's not always given, but this was definitely a choice for the two of us.
Good to hear.
Good to hear. Yeah. Hopefully, Catherine will corroborate. But it was a willing choice, and yet I had a lot of ambivalence about it just at the beginning. So I wanted to start exploring that story with other dads, to give it some airtime, to say, okay, of course, there's lots we can learn as dads from each other, hero stories, success stories, techniques, realness, and everybody can find the hero story to tell. That's easy, relatively speaking. But it's much harder to tell the story of when you look in your mirror and you don't like what you see. When you have those moments of deep disconnection or shame or alienation or loneliness, or, as we've spoken about before, anger, because I think being a dad has taken me into spaces of anger that I didn't think I would ever experience. And just keeping that counterpoint. I was just reflecting this week. I had some difficult moments. I was just sharing with Sam before we came on air. Some difficulty yesterday, but also I had those moments of looking into my son's eyes and just feeling that utter bliss of love when you see this extraordinary human being in front of you, and just your breath is taken away by this person who you're blessed to have in your life. So that's a long rambling answer, but I don't know if it gets to anything that you asked even.
It just brings up more questions.
Damn you.
Which is a good thing, considering this is a conversation. What I've really heard is this sense of, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like the difference, the scale of this real sense of happiness and excitement and freeness, and then the depth of the emotion that being a parent can bring, like the fear and the worry and the anger, and how quickly it goes from one to the other. I don't know of anything else that creates this sense of this movement between those two that quickly. Like it's so quickly, isn't it? And there was a part of what you were saying, Matt, which I'd really love to explore with you, because I feel like you have some answers here around expectation, you know, and how we have so many expectations of ourselves, whether it's society or whatever, I don't know, but I'd love to explore that with you. And why is it that, do you think that it's not okay for us to talk about that and feel that? Why does this sense of guilt and shame for these feelings come from?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you have to answer at different levels. Some of it, and I think I don't want to be too sort of facile about it, but I think some of it goes down to sort of the public image of fatherhood. It's kind of quite sugar-coated. I mean, obviously we see there's lots of films and stories of like dads in positions of redemption, but the predominant narrative, I would say, is, you know, super dad who's, well, it's polarized. We say it's either absent dad who's a complete failure, dad who is non-participative in their child's life, or it's the other extreme, which is, you know, superhero dad who can't set a foot wrong. So that's quite polarized, I would say. Without being too generalized or stereotypic, you know, it's harder for men to bond over this kind of thing, to talk about the deeper emotions. You know, men sometimes, not always, but tend to stick at the more superficial level. I think for a man to say, I'm a dad and I'm really struggling, is really quite hard, particularly because it opens up questions of vulnerability. As you were suggesting, it opens up questions about how you measure yourself, how you measure yourself against others. It's difficult to ask for help. It's difficult to know where to go for help. It's difficult to know whether you'll be understood by others. And, you know, everybody says no child comes with an instruction manual, and of course that's true. But I think there's a sort of, you know, fatherhood is such an archetypal thing. I made an assumption, maybe wrongly, I think, that you kind of would know, you know, and people say that you kind of work it out, and I have been working it out like everybody else works it out, but at the same time, you know, some people are more relaxed about it than others. I don't think I was particularly relaxed with myself about it for a long time. I think I gave myself quite a hard time. Maybe that's becoming a dad later in life. Maybe that's kind of how I have measured myself in my life. Maybe that's, you know, my own particular life story that plays out in that way. But I think that's the large part of it.
Yeah, I can really resonate with a lot of that. And that for me is kind of where the heart of dad fits in. It's like it's connecting all the dots and not kind of adding to and saying this is a fix-all, but just a place to be as you are. Because there's what I heard you saying, forgive me if I'm wrong, but there's this sense of acceptance and just being who we are and allowing of feelings. Like, and we've both talked before in depth about how angry, how frustrating, and like, yeah, I mean, I don't know anything else that's created that depth of feeling before in my life. Certainly not in that direction. And that kind of what the heart of dad is, right? It's that space of exploration and okayness within that, to explore and to be okay with what is, and to have a place to go, like you said, because where do we go?
In the starting point, I mean, my first aim for it is to create a safe space for dads to be real. And as I've said before in my sort of end of season 1 summary, I really applaud the dads who've been on the interview so far, yourself included, Sam, who were willing to show up in whatever way they could and be real about their experiences of fatherhood. And there's a whole spectrum there. Of course there is. There's always going to be a whole spectrum. But even the fact of being willing to have the conversation, I think, is a massive step. And I've had quite a few people feedback saying it's just so refreshing to hear men talking about this kind of stuff, to have men talk about their emotions, men talking about their ups and downs. That in itself is very, very powerful. So for me, the first step is absolutely having that space where it's safe just to say it's okay to be who you are, that this is real, this is just the human struggle. There is no such thing as perfection in fatherhood. I suppose my longer term aim, which is the second driver for me, which is I want things to improve. I certainly don't want my child's 6 now. I know deep down that I want to extract is maybe the wrong word, but ensure the maximum quality of relationship I can within my power for the time he's with me in my life, and for me not to get through that time when he leaves home and live with the regret of not taking full responsibility for my part in the situation. That's not to say I want to deny my humanity or my foibles or the moments of tripping up and falling flat on my face, which are plenty and normal, as we're saying. But to say actually there is hope for moving beyond the space of despair and resistance, which I found myself in at times, into a place of connectedness and hopefulness. Without sugarcoating it, not saying that's got to be the norm 100% of the time, so I don't think that's ever possible. But I suppose to come into a loving relationship with ourselves so that we can become more loving with those around us. I suppose that would be the kind of the heart of Dad.
Yeah, there's this, again, I hear this word that comes up for me is around acceptance, just accepting ourselves. I mean, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I heard throughout, in the theme throughout the Heart of Dad conversations was kind of sometimes, again, without being too generalistic, we can only talk from personal experience and from the conversations that I've heard, but this sense of pushing and drive and always working towards something. There's that conditioning there, isn't there? Quite often, which I've heard is quite a common theme, or at least that's something I've seen. So what do you think? Because I know we've spoken in the past about challenges of acceptance. I'd love to hear a story from you about that, because I think giving some context would be really insightful, especially for the guys listening, right? Because this is your thing, and I think it'll be really beneficial to hear something from you in that respect.
So do you mean a story of when I've struggled with acceptance or I've managed to accept how things are going on?
Well, more around, the struggle of acceptance. I was just trying to formulate a question. I think you've kind of done that for me, because it led me on to want to ask another one, which I'm doing a bit.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, I suppose, at the simplest level, that's the point of greatest stress, is not accepting what is. And I suppose if there was a recurrent theme for my podcast, if when you hear me chipping in, I'll be mentioning about bedtimes, because all the time that I've known Sam, one of the recurrent themes in, when Sam asks me how am I doing, I go, yeah, it's all good, but bedtimes are a struggle. And there's been various things I haven't been able to participate in with Sam and other coaches that are evening based, because it's all hands on deck for bedtime. which is partly choice, but partly circumstance. And if I could be drawing, I mean, for those of you listening on audio, but you won't see this, but if on video, I'm drawing like a roller coaster graph here of what my experience is. And there's a straight line, which is bedtimes are always quite late with my son, for whatever reason. His rhythms, his biology, his needs are that he won't be in bed. It's got later and later, but at the moment it's around, if we're lucky, lights out at 9 o'clock, and quite often it's later than that. And I've resisted that massively at times, to the point where, if he'd given me a sledgehammer, I would have just smashed a hole through the wall. I got so cross at the constant, prevarication and procrastination and resistance that he was having. And there have been other times when I've just gone with the flow. I've just gone, okay, this is the concept of time is one that I'm imposing on it. It's my rhythm that I'm imposing on him. It's my needs that I'm imposing on him. Why do my needs get to trump his, or vice versa? And I've just kind of relaxed into it, and they've been late nights, but I haven't got into my stress and anger and rage about it. But there have been times where the opposite has happened, and I've just felt so enraged by the loss of control, which is really at the heart of the anger. It's kind of the sense of, the space is no longer mine to do what I want. And for me, I'm an early riser, and I like to get to bed relatively early. So if my son is getting to bed, not far from the time when I actually want to start winding down for the evening, and thinking about bed, and I know that I'm going to be up much earlier than him, then I start constructing ideas of, well, okay, this isn't fair, this isn't right. My health is going to suffer because I'm not going to get enough sleep, etc., etc. So two sides of the acceptance coin in that story.
It's like we've got their agenda, our agenda, and then actually what happens, which is quite tough balance. As you were talking, it's quite funny because Albert came in my office and he was like, Daddy, I love you. And then just walked out, and I was like, oh man, this is one of those moments. It's like, I love you too.
Beautiful.
And then in a minute, he'll be really annoyed. So I'm really curious, Matt. Thanks for being so honest, because again, a lot of this is about awareness, isn't it? And having those discussions, talking about it, and we know through coaching with one another how that awareness and conversation is it's the beginnings of anything, whatever it is going to be, whether it's just a relief of having that conversation, or a part of change or transformation, whatever that looks like. So it's part of the first part of. So really curious, a question I have for you around the heart of dad is, and along the topic of all of this stuff that we've talked about, and they're having your own agenda and how frustrating it can be. Really curious to know, what legacy is it that you want the heart of dad to create or to leave behind? What does that look like?
Such a great question. I was thinking about this the other week. I was talking to Jamie Smart about it, and I said, for me, if I can help eradicate the legacy of intergenerational trauma through the heart of dad, that would be a massive win. I'm not saying I can do this globally, but in whoever I can come into contact with in the coming years with Heart of Dad as a coach, in creating this movement to support dads, if we can stop the pattern where dads, because of their own alienations within themselves, alienate their own children, who then become alienating parents themselves, that would be an amazing legacy. And I'm saying this without any bitterness or anger towards my own dad, because I can really recognize at this point in my life that he was a child of the war. He went through his own trauma. his own losses, and how I think he genuinely did his best throughout his life to be the best dad he could be. And yet I know there were times when he really wasn't there, he wasn't present as a dad. And I found myself being the same. And I'd like to really put the brakes on that for myself and for other dads, so that with our children, we create the next generation who doesn't live in the shadow of that legacy, where trauma isn't passed on from generation to generation, but actually we make clean breaks, reset ourselves, ensure that our children get the absolute best start in life, not only with their mums if they're present and their dads if they're present, but with dads who can be as present as they can be with their kids, while being real, while accepting that, you know, it's not all flowery meadows and wonderful sunny days. You know, it comes with all the kind of the difficulty with it, but at the heart of it, there is a commitment to make a shift, that we give our children that gift of our presence as much as we can. Because for me, that is the biggest determiner of how dads impact their children. And I don't mean just physical presence, but I mean with attention, you know, with real connected, profound attention for their children, which I find a struggle at times. So that's really what the legacy would be for me, is that we can break the cycles of intergenerational trauma where dads can't be present enough for their kids.
Mate, I love it. I love that answer. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. If anyone listening to this is kind of feeling like that, right? Well, this resonates. Like, where do you start with that? Because I think one of the things I most love about you, Matt, is that you have this real gift of not just working around this sort of stuff, you know, with psychology and psychotherapy, but how you're able to bring out personality and help people create something new. Like, you have this real gift of that. So it would be a travesty for me not to say, you know, and me not to ask, like, how would somebody start? Like, if someone's hearing this and they're thinking, actually, yeah, this really resonates. How do they start that process of breaking that intergenerational trauma?
I don't want to be too facile about it. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but the first step in any of these things is recognition, isn't it? It's being honest with yourself. It's saying, actually, there's more that I have to offer. It's shining a light a little bit, as we've been doing with the podcast, and particularly today in my own personal kind of witnessing, shall we say, that we're willing to look at those shadow sides of ourselves, that we're willing to own where things are difficult. Because if we're not able to do that, there's no first step after that. If you're in denial or ignorance of what you're creating, then how can you shift it? So I think there has to be a willingness, and I think deep down every dad knows this. It's no secret. It can't be hidden. You know there's something in the pit of your stomach or in your heart that tells you something is not quite right. Something could be different. And that isn't about shame. That's a kind feeling. It's a kind of the feeling of awakening up to what is possible. It's not a feeling of persecution or criticism or saying that, you know, you're inadequate. It's quite the opposite. It's a really kind feeling that says, actually, I want more from my life and I want more from my children, and I'm willing to open up to what the shadow sides of my experience are, to move beyond that into really, well, stepping into your power, but not in the power over, but power within. You're not having power over your children or your partner or anybody else, but having power within yourself to really show up as a dad as best you can. And I think the ways of doing that are multiple, but kind of complicated, kinds of conversations that we've been having in the last year, I think, are beautiful for that. Because I think, having been a psychotherapist, I would say there's enormous power in psychotherapy, but it tends to be primarily focused on healing the wounds. Okay, well, I see things quite differently now. I don't tend to talk about people in terms of woundedness, because I think actually they've got everything they need already right now. So it's waking them up to that possibility, and then from there creating a life that they want for themselves, and being the dad they want to be, creating the dream that they want, not from a place of lack, but from a place of power.
Yeah, I love it, man, and it just sounds like such beautiful unexplored territory. Like, it feels so fresh and so new. I mean, as a dad myself, like, listening to you, it just feels like there's a real space for this. Yeah. And I'll go as far as to say need, because that feels too much, but there's just this, there's so much room for this. I really do. One last question I think I have for you, Matt, is if someone was listening to this and resonating and want to talk to you or talk on your show, what would you need from them in order for it to be a really powerful conversation for them?
That's a great question. I suppose first and foremost is a commitment to be real. I think everybody has some level of bullshit-ometer built in, and nobody wants to hear, well, maybe I don't want to hear any stories of people crushing it as a dad. Because it just reminds me of where I'm not crushing it. But joking apart, I think it's good to hear the success stories. Of course it is, but really, the power of this is when people open up to what is the most challenging for them. To my mind, that's where I've been touched the most. That's where I've felt the most reassurance. That's where I felt the deepest connection. I've learned a lot from the success stories. Don't get me wrong. I think that if you listen to any of the podcasts, you're hearing dad after dad giving really powerful examples of where things are working well. And that in itself, I think, is a gift. But I'm more interested, if I can put it that way, without no disrespect to what's been shared on the podcast, because I absolutely love the conversation, but I'm more interested in the shadow stories. And when people are willing to come on and within reason, bear as much as they can of their dark nights of being dads, as well as their light days of being dads, I think that is a great starting point. As it was, as I said, if you want to start doing this work, it's kind of having that awareness. Well, the dads who, I think this is true of all the dads who've been on the show so far, they've been willing to look at themselves. They've been willing to explore and examine who they are as a dad, to celebrate their wins, but also to say, well, look, these are the things that I found really, really tough. And that to me is your entry ticket to the show. I mean, I want to have really real conversations with dads, ones that people can lean forward to or sit up and listen and go, oh, thank God somebody else is having that experience, because that's me. That's me.
Beautiful. So is there anything else, Max? I'm aware we're coming to the end of time, and I just, is there anything else that you would like to say to wrap this up?
I touched on it at the beginning, but I just want to say how grateful I am for this experience that I've had, catalyzed in conversation with you, supported by many others. It's been eye-opening and moving and powerful to listen to dads talk about themselves. I've just enjoyed the conversations immensely. So I'm very, very grateful to everybody who's taken part and listened so far. And I'm excited because I think there are so many other conversations to be had. So, my invitation is really to anybody who's interested in this, in the heart of Dad, to just to get in touch and for us to deepen the conversation and join the community as well. Facebook, search for Heart of Dad, join our group.
Perfect. And certainly from my point of view, Matt, not just as a coach, but as a friend and a fellow dad, just want to thank you for bringing this into awareness, into the world, into people's view, and making it accessible, because it is just such an important thing. I mean, I talk to my mates and we all have the same sort of conversations, but they're very much kind of, we're talked about, but not really explored. And that's why I love this so much, because it gives us a chance to actually properly get into the detail and take the heaviness out of it. So that's it. Is there anything you'd like to say to your listeners before I stop the recording?
Nothing other than thank you for all the people who've downloaded so far, and yeah, look forward to releasing the next few seasons, which are in the bag as well.